I never thought my past relationship would follow me into the darkest corners of my life. But here I am, writing this down because I can't sleep anymore. I used to tell myself it was all in my head, that the things I saw, the things I felt, were nothing but the result of guilt, or trauma, or just my imagination trying to eat me alive. But it's been years since I broke up with Melissa, and the way she came back into my life is something no normal person would ever believe. Maybe that's why I'm here, telling strangers instead of anyone close to me. They'd only call me insane. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. Melissa and I dated in college. She wasn't the kind of girl people forgot easily, always the center of attention, the type who made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. At first, I was obsessed with her, like most guys. She had this strange charm, this aura that pulled you in. But behind her smile was something darker. I noticed it in the little things, the way she could lie without blinking, how she seemed to enjoy watching people squirm, how she always kept a secret or two up her sleeve. Still, I stayed. Because when Melissa loved you, even if it was twisted, it felt like the world revolved around you. Our breakup wasn't clean. One night, after months of jealousy, paranoia, and fights that ended with her staring at me with this cold, lifeless grin, I finally snapped. I told her it was over. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just tilted her head, gave me that chilling little smirk and whispered, "You'll regret this." I should have known then that it wasn't an empty threat. Years passed. I moved out of state, got a job in a small city, and tried to bury my past. For a while it worked. I even convinced myself I had moved on completely. That was until I noticed the woman who moved into the apartment across the street from mine. It started small. I would glance out my window late at night and see her standing there, watching me. At first it was just a silhouette, barely visible through the thin curtains of her place. Then one night the streetlight caught her face and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was Melissa. My first thought was, it can't be. She doesn't know where I live. I moved across states. This is impossible. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. The shape of her face, the way her hair fell, the curve of her smile. It was her. She didn't wave. She didn't even blink. She just stood there, night after night, staring into my apartment like she was studying me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone who looked like her. Maybe my brain was filling in the blanks because I never truly got over the fear she left in me. But one evening, when I was coming home from work, I saw her more clearly. She was leaving the building across the street carrying groceries. And when our eyes met, she smiled. The same slow, unnerving grin I had seen the night we broke up. I froze. My hands went cold, my throat dry. I wanted to confront her, demand to know what she was doing there, how she had found me. But something inside told me not to. Instead, I turned and rushed upstairs, locking every bolt on my door. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, curtains closed, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Days went by and I tried to ignore it. I stopped looking out my window. I avoided leaving my apartment unless absolutely necessary, but ignoring Melissa didn't make her go away. In fact, it made things worse. One morning, I opened my door to grab the mail and found a single photograph lying on the floor. It was a picture of me, taken through my own window while I was sleeping on the couch. My blood ran cold. I didn't own curtains thick enough to block a camera. That meant she had been in my building, maybe even inside my apartment. I rushed to the landlord, demanded to know who had moved into the place across the street. But he looked at me confused, swearing no one had rented that unit in years. He even pulled up records showing it was still vacant. I didn't believe him at first, thought he was covering for her. But later that night, when I forced myself to sneak into the building across the street, I discovered he wasn't lying. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. Dust coated the counters. No furniture. No curtains. No sign of life at all. Yet when I turned to look out the window, I could see my own apartment perfectly from where she always stood. I ran out of there as fast as I could, heart hammering, lungs burning. When I got back to my place, I locked myself in the bathroom and vomited. Nothing made sense anymore. Either I was losing my mind, or Melissa was something else, something not human. But the worst part? That night, after I forced myself into a restless sleep, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing. A message notification. Hands shaking. I picked it up and saw an unknown number. The message said, "Told you you'd regret it." Attached was a picture. It was me, asleep in my bed, taken just seconds earlier. I dropped the phone, too terrified to breathe. I didn't move for hours, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. Just silence. The next day I called the police. I explained everything. The woman, the pictures, the stalking. They came, searched the building across the street again, checked security footage. Nothing. The cameras didn't even show me entering the place, though I know I did. They treated me like I was crazy, maybe hallucinating. I almost started to believe them. Almost. Because last week, I got another photo. This time, it wasn't of me. It was of Melissa. She was standing right behind me in my own apartment, her face twisted into that same grin. I never saw her. Never heard her. Just a photo that proved she was there. And the scariest part? I live alone. The doors were locked. No one should have been able to get inside. I don't know how to escape this. I don't know if she's alive, dead, or something in between. All I know is that when I close my eyes now, I can feel her watching me, closer than ever. And last night, for the first time since she came back, I heard her voice again, whispering in the dark, just inches from my ear. She said the same words she did the night we broke up. "You'll regret this." They tell you breakups are messy, but they never warn you about the little things people leave behind. Tiny, invisible threads that can be pulled until the whole fabric of your life unravels. I thought I'd cleared my apartment out after Jenna left. The framed photos, the mugs with our initials, the ridiculous plant she named Phil. I threw them all away like a severed limb and told myself that was closure. I thought getting rid of her stuff would mean getting rid of her. Turns out I was naive, very naive. Jenna and I met at a bar downtown when we were young enough to think reckless was the same thing as brave. She had this laugh that filled rooms, and when she smiled, her whole face lit up, not the smile of someone who hides things, but the kind that makes you trust them. That trust lulled me into letting her in too quickly. She was everything, beautiful, frantic, brilliant, and she loved to share music. Playlists were her religion. Every morning she'd send me a string of songs, new bands, old favorites, something to make the commute less gray. I didn't think much of it at the time, but music became the soundtrack of the months we were together. Every memory stamped with 3 or 4 songs like dates carved into a tree. The breakup was sudden. She left one night after an argument that started over something stupid. Texting, jealousy, me being exhausted from work and snapping, and ended with her packing a single duffel and walking out like she hadn't been a major character in my life for 2 years. She left the playlists behind, literally. Her old laptop, logged-in accounts, her half of our streaming service. I kept them in a drawer for weeks, too embarrassed to delete them, rationalizing that they were one of the few things that didn't sting when I touched them. Eventually I gave them up, deleted the accounts, reformatted the laptop. It was an act of mercy, or so I told myself. For months after, I pretended everything was fine. I dated a little, drank too much at parties, tried to outrun the memories. Then, 6 months later, I started getting song suggestions that I hadn't searched for, curated playlists that seemed to know the exact mood I was in. Some were melancholic, some furious, always the right song at the right time. At first, I assumed it was the algorithm learning me, some clever AI matching my streaming history with songs Jenna once loved. but algorithms don't send you messages. One afternoon in late October, while packing for a weekend getaway, I found a burned CD wedged between the pages of a book I never read. I don't even own a CD player anymore. The disc had no label, only a thumbprint in the center and a scribble in blue marker that read, "Do not play, unless you miss me." My first instinct was to toss it, but grief is a stupid, sentimental thing. I put the CD in my glove compartment and forgot about it. That night, as rain pelted the windows and the city hummed like distant insects, I drove to a friend's house and left the CD in my car. When I got home, a notification on my phone said someone had added me to a new playlist and had titled it with my name. The playlist had one song on it. I didn't click. I sat there, muscles tight, the idea of Jenna's laugh morphing into something predatory in my chest. I told myself it was coincidence, the universe playing cruel jokes. Still, I couldn't ignore how the playlist updated itself, how every dawn brought new tracks that traced the contours of my day. The real terror started the night my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I shouldn't have answered. There's an unwritten rule about missing calls at weird hours, but I did. A voice, flat and small, said, "Play it." No hello, no context, just that imperative. I hung up thinking it was a misdial, a drunk friend. Then, minutes later, a text. "You promised to listen." The number wasn't one I recognized, and my messages app flagged it as unknown. I felt a stupid, childish fury. Who were these people, this band of shadows that thought it okay to wake me in the middle of the night? I blocked the number and tried to sleep, but every time my eyelids fluttered, a song from my past pushed against the edges of my dreams. The USB burner I'd bought the week before sat untouched on my desk. I dug it out and remembered the burned CD in my car. Curiosity, always the dangerous cousin of grief, nudged me. I drove to the car, fingers numb from the cold, popped the glove compartment, and found the CD where I'd left it. Back home, the old laptop from my closet, one of those relics I'd kept for nostalgia, still had a working CD drive. I slid the disc in and waited for the little white circle to spin. When the track began, it sounded like a field recording. Static, then the kind of low hum you hear in empty subway stations. I was 3 seconds in when a voice, unmistakably Jenna's, whispered my name. I almost turned the disc off. Instead, I let it play. The recording stitched together fragments. Songs we'd shared, fragments of conversations, the echo of a fight, laughter, the creak of a floorboard. It played like a ghost's mixtape. But it was more than that. Between the songs, buried in the noise, were details that no random person could know. The exact brand of coffee I drank each morning, the nickname my father used to call me with, a name only he used, the address of the apartment I had moved to after we split. It cataloged me. I called Jenna. No answer. Her socials were private, like she had evaporated. I scrolled through old messages to find a hint, then froze. A photo she had sent the morning after we broke up. An image of a parking lot at night with a single car under a sodium lamp. I'd never told anyone about that night, about how I had driven through that lot to cry because I thought crying in my car would make me look like less of a mess. The CD had captured the sound of rain hitting the car that night, a specific rhythm that matched that memory. Whoever made this knew me intimately, intentionally. Over the next week, more packages arrived at my door, small things banal. A pair of film tickets with the stub dated to the exact day we first kissed. A Polaroid of the two of us taken by an ex who'd gone missing from Jenna's life years ago. Each item carried a single note. Remember. At first I thought it was a cruel ex or someone who wanted to mess with me. I reported it to the police, who told me to keep records and be careful. They were polite but resigned. Once the internet finds a way into people's lives, it's messy and often unsolvable. One night after work, I found a new playlist on my streaming account titled simply, "The Night I Stayed." It had 21 tracks. I hesitated, thumb hovering over play. Then I clicked. The first song was one we listened to when we were deliriously happy. Its chords made my chest ache in a way I hadn't known was possible. The track that followed was a voice memo, Jenna's voice, speaking in low, controlled tones. She listed dates. She listed places. Then she said, as if reading from a script written to make me unsteady, "I wanted to make sure you never forgot why it was over." The songs became darker, more discordant. Voices appeared and overlapped. Snippets of us talking about moving, about therapy, about leaving. But threaded through them all was an undercurrent of something clinical, intentional. It was as if someone had recorded life as evidence, a dossier of me. I started to see her everywhere. Cafes, a woman in a red coat on the subway, the way a stranger hummed a melody I'd once heard Jenna sing in the shower. Only the melody wasn't her voice but something colder, like glass being drawn across another sheet of glass. I checked locks twice, 3 times. I changed passwords, moved accounts, even unplugged devices. It didn't matter. She was inside the static now. The playlists found me through places and devices I'd never linked, through a shared account I'd long since terminated and a radio station I never listened to. It was as if she had rebuilt herself out of the spaces she once occupied. Weeks into this, I found a breadcrumb that didn't make sense. A comment on an old forum thread discussing old mixtapes. The comment was short. He never knew it was the playlist that mattered. The username was an anagram of my full name. I dug deeper and found that same username scattered like seeds across obscure pages, lyrics annotated, old blogs, a ghost account on a music forum that dated back to when we were students. Whoever it was had been building something for a long time. The idea of a planned, long-term campaign of haunting made my stomach knot. This felt calculated, not a series of random pranks. Then one night, as I was falling asleep, my phone buzzed with a new notification. Play the last track. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart lurched. The playlist had always ended on a blank track. Silence. Nothing. And yet the silence itself felt loaded. I opened the playlist and pressed play with the care of someone defusing a bomb. The last track started with static, then fingers on a piano, tentative notes that bled into a melody I recognized from the lullaby my mother used to hum. I hadn't told Jenna about that lullaby. It was one of those private things you keep for yourself. Halfway through the track, a voice came on, reading a list, names, dates, places we had been together. At the very end, after a pause that stretched like a held breath, the voice said softly, "If you listen all the way, you'll understand why I had to do it." It was Jenna. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. Understand what? Why she'd left? Why she had stalked me? Why every song felt like a breadcrumb leading to a trap? I scrolled for a contact number in the playlist notes. There was one. A local phone number with a single line of text. Meet me where it started. The coordinates were to an old boathouse on the edge of the river where we'd first kissed, where we'd promised things we never kept. I drove there, the playlist on repeat in my car, the city a blur through rain-smeared glass. The boathouse was shuttered, windows thick with grime. I stepped inside anyway because people in horror stories always tell themselves they are the exception, and you and I both know that urge. The need to face the thing that scares you, as if confronting it will prove it was all a dream. The boathouse smelled like mold and old plywood. At the center of the room on a folding table there were speakers and a laptop, and on the laptop screen, a single image, a Polaroid of my face taken the night we fought before she left, the night I told her it had to end. Next to it, a note. I wanted to make a record, for me, for you, for us. Then in handwriting I recognized down to the curve of the R, but I needed you to play it. I didn't see her at first. I almost missed the movement in the doorway, slight, like a curtain stirred by wind. When she stepped into the light, she looked older, thinner, but the smile was the same. Up close, her eyes had a glassy sheen, like someone who'd been staring at a screen for too long. She said without preamble, "Do you remember the day you said you were sorry?" I did, Do you remember what you promised? I did. Then she tilted her head, and the final twist landed like a brick. You promised to listen to every song I made. You promised you would never forget. You broke that promise, so I made sure you couldn't. I realized then, slow and cold, the playlists were never about haunting me. They were a trap, a slow, meticulous method of making me complicit. Each song, each memory, each item was a stitch in a net designed to pull me here, to this boathouse, to a place where the last track would end and the truth would be delivered. I asked her what truth, and she smiled the smile of someone who had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times. You left me, she said simply, so I left you something worse. I wanted to run. I wanted to smash the laptop, burn the CDs, eradicate every timestamp that tethered me to her. But before I could move, she reached into her pocket and set something on the table, my driver's license, scuffed at the edges, and beneath it a small envelope with my name in her handwriting. Inside was a single Polaroid, me, asleep in my car in that empty parking lot months ago. Under it, in small print, a date. Not the date of that night, but a date 10 days from now. Jenna's eyes met mine and she said softly, "If you want the rest of the tracks, you have to come back tomorrow. Bring something to trade." Her grin held no warmth. I left the boathouse with the photo in my pocket and the playlist in my head, every song looping like a chant. For days, I couldn't think straight. I changed my number. I moved the laptop to a different place. I tried to delete the playlist. But wherever I went, snippets of those tracks found me, and in the back of my throat was the taste of that final line. Bring something to trade. What was I supposed to trade? My sanity? My life? The voice in the last track had promised understanding, but the promise came with conditions and a deadline. Now every noise at night sounds like a metronome counting down. I keep the burned CD in a drawer, as if it were a loaded gun. The last Polaroid is on my fridge, face down, because I can't bear to look at it for too long. The date on the back is getting closer, and I can't stop turning over the options in my head. The police think I'm exaggerating. Friends think I'm being melodramatic. I know the truth. Jenna wanted a record, and whatever record means, she's determined to finish it. I promised myself I'd be brave. I promised I'd confront this and end it. But bravery, I've discovered, has limits. So here I am, writing this because maybe someone out there has advice or courage, or a way to undo a playlist that has already been played. I'm going to the boathouse on the date she wrote. I don't know what I'll bring. I only know I can't keep pretending silence will save me. If you don't hear from me after that night, assume the worst. And if you do, if I somehow make it out, I'll tell you exactly what was on that final track. Some breakups are ugly, some are quiet, but mine with Claire was volcanic. She had this intensity about her, sharp, consuming, like standing too close to a bonfire. At first, I mistook it for passion. She had this way of making every conversation feel urgent, like every second we spent together had the weight of history pressing on it. I loved her too much, too quickly, and when things started to fall apart, I should have walked away. But by the time I realized how deep I was in, Claire had already wrapped herself around me like ivy on stone. We ended things in the middle of winter. Snow had piled so high on the sidewalks that city life felt muffled, like the world had gone underwater. We fought that night about everything, her jealousy, my exhaustion, the way we could never agree on what our future looked like. She wanted us to move into her family's cabin up north, cut ourselves off from the city, start fresh. I told her I needed space, that maybe we weren't meant to last. She went silent for a long moment, then whispered, "You'll regret this." Those words burned more than the fight itself. We didn't talk after that. I blocked her number, deleted her socials, even got a new phone. For a few weeks, life was lighter. But then, Little things started to go wrong. My apartment door would be unlocked when I knew I'd bolted it. My car alarm went off in the middle of the night, but when I checked, there was no one around. At first, I chalked it up to city life, to paranoia. But one morning, on my way to work, I found something wedged under my windshield wiper, a pine cone, dusted with snow. That might sound harmless, but the smell of pine hit me so hard it pulled me straight back to Claire's family cabin. I hadn't told anyone about the cabin. Not even my closest friends knew how much time Claire and I had spent there. Yet suddenly these reminders kept appearing. Pine needles scattered across my doorstep. A folded flannel shirt in my laundry that wasn't mine. A photo of the cabin, tucked into my mailbox with no return address. It felt like the universe was nudging me toward that place, and deep down I knew it wasn't random. Against my better judgment, I drove up north. I told myself it was to prove something, to confirm the cabin was empty, that Claire wasn't there, that my imagination was running wild. The drive took hours, snow falling heavier the closer I got. The road narrowed, lined with trees that bent inward like they were trying to close me in. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, night had fallen, and the place looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen it. Dark wood, sagging porch, windows blank like eyes that had stopped seeing. The lock turned too easily. Inside, it was colder than outside. Dust clung to the furniture, the air thick with mildew. I walked through each room with my flashlight, trying to convince myself I was just checking. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. It was just an abandoned cabin. But then I saw it, a trail of fresh footprints in the snow leading from the back door into the woods. Something in me should have screamed to leave, but instead, I followed. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound deafening. The footprints led me deeper until I reached a small clearing. In the center was a wooden box, half buried in the snow. I dug it out, hands numb, and when I opened it, my stomach twisted. Inside were pieces of my life, a sock from my drawer, a photo of me at work I hadn't known was taken, a coffee cup sleeve with my handwriting, and on top of it all, a note in Claire's sharp, slanted script. "You finally came." I dropped the box and bolted back toward the cabin, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. Every branch seemed to snag at my jacket. Every shadow looked like someone reaching out. When I finally stumbled inside and slammed the door shut, I leaned against it, gasping. Then, from upstairs, I heard it, the floor creaking under the weight of footsteps. I wanted to tell myself it was the house settling. Old wood groans, right? But these weren't random creaks. They were steady, pacing. Someone was up there. I gripped the flashlight so hard it dug into my palm and forced myself up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The bedroom door was half open, the same way we had left it once, after a weekend here. I pushed it open with shaking hands, and the beam of my flashlight landed on the bed. Spread across the sheets were dozens of Polaroids of me, sleeping, working, walking home at night, all recent. My stomach turned ice cold, and then, in the corner, a figure shifted. It was Claire, but not the Claire I remembered. Her hair was tangled, her skin pale, her eyes wide like she hadn't slept in months. She didn't scream, didn't attack. She just smiled slowly and said, "You finally listened." I stammered, demanded to know what she was doing, how she had these photos, why she'd been following me. She tilted her head, almost like she was amused, and whispered, "Because you were supposed to come back. You promised me forever in this place, and forever doesn't end just because you wanted it to." I backed toward the door, but she moved closer, each step deliberate, like she knew I wouldn't leave. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low, almost mournful. "This cabin, it's ours. It keeps us together. That's why you felt it. That's why you couldn't stay away." I didn't know what she meant, but something in her tone chilled me more than the air ever could. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the photos, the box, the promises. I sprinted out of the cabin through the snow back to my car. When I slammed the door shut and turned the key, I glanced back just once. She was standing on the porch, barefoot in the snow, watching me with that same eerie smile. And as I drove away, tires skidding on the ice, I swear I saw her mouth the words again. "You'll regret this." I haven't gone back since. But last week, I woke up to find pine needles scattered across my apartment floor. My windows were locked, my doors were bolted. And yet the smell of pine filled the air like I was back in that cabin. And that night, just before sleep dragged me under, I heard a faint voice in the dark, whispering from the corner of my room, "You finally came." I used to think the worst part about breakups was the silence that followed. Those long, empty hours where your hands reach for a phone that doesn't ring anymore. I was wrong. The worst part is the evidence they leave behind. The little proof of a life you can't get back that keeps showing up in places you thought were private. My name is Tom, and the woman I dated for 3 years was named Ava. She was brilliant in a soft, bitter way, poet tattoos, a laugh that sounded like a secret, and eyes that made you feel like the world had suddenly narrowed to just the two of you. When she left, she didn't slam any doors. She didn't send me a flame of anger. She walked out like the space between us had been measured and she'd finally decided to stop pretending it was small enough to bridge. I told myself I'd survive. I told myself I'd be fine. I lied to everyone, mostly to myself. At first, everything was typical. Mutual friends took sides, playlists were unfollowed, and the city felt too loud in certain neighborhoods. Then the photographs started arriving. Not physical photos at first, just images sent to my email from an unknown address, JPEGs of places we'd been together, but from angles I knew no one should have been able to capture. A picture of our favorite diner, taken from the alley where I used to smoke. A selfie of Ava laughing outside a bookshop, except she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking past it like the person who took the photo was standing beside someone she cared about. Each image had a small note attached, a time, a place, a single word like remember or again. I thought it was a stalker, some ex with too much time and too much malice. I reported it once to look official, but the police told me to keep records and to be careful. They said the right things and left. The echo of their hollow concern followed me into sleepless nights. Then the messages started. Not text messages, not calls. Images pushed through social feeds tagged in places I hadn't been in months. A photo of Ava in a park at midnight with snow on the ground, my reflection in a nearby window blurred into the shot. A photo of a coffee cup I'd left behind one morning, the lipstick smear on the rim distinctly hers. I blocked accounts, changed passwords, got a new phone. The harassment seemed to shift with the technology, anonymity playing hide-and-seek with me. I set up cameras in my apartment eventually, because when fear gets too loud, you try to control at least one thing. The cameras were small, ugly things I shoved into vases and behind picture frames, devices that felt childish but gave me a sense of agency. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. I wanted proof. What I caught was worse than anything I could have imagined. One night in early spring, I woke to the sound of my living room light clicking on. My skin crawled. The camera I had hidden in the plant by the couch recorded someone standing in my doorway at 2:03 a.m. She, Ava, walked through, carrying a stack of my mail, setting it on the coffee table, and then she turned. Her hair fell over her face, and she called my name the way she used to when she wanted me to come downstairs from the roof during the afternoons we spent drinking cheap wine. I sat frozen in bed watching her move like a ghost through the footage, every movement precise, familiar, intimate. And then she reached up and brushed my cheek like she always had. Except I wasn't there. I was across town at my brother's place, sleeping on his couch because I couldn't bear the weight of my apartment any longer. The timestamps were accurate. The GPS on my phone's backup confirmed it. I felt like the world had split. I replayed that clip a dozen times. I slowed it down. I stopped it on the second where her palm hovered an inch from where my face would have been if I'd been there. Something in the footage made my throat close. The way she closed her eyes when she touched nothing, as if she were remembering the feeling rather than living it. It was the footage that made me stop calling the police and start looking at myself. If she was standing in my living room and I wasn't home, then either I had the world's most elaborate hallucination happening at 2 a.m, or someone was using my apartment to stage scenes. And staging scenes requires a willing participant or a terrible methodical patience. Neither comforted me. I followed the breadcrumbs like a man half lost in his own life. I traced places the photos had been taken, talked to baristas, asked strangers if they'd seen the woman in the pictures. A bartender in a neighborhood where Ava and I used to go said casually, "You know she looks different sometimes, right?" I blinked. Different how? "Like she's wearing someone else's face," he said. He thought he was being poetic. He didn't know how literal he was. I started to notice things. A bracelet one woman was wearing in a photo had been on Ava's wrist years ago, and yet the face in the image didn't match any face I knew. It was close, familiar enough to make your stomach drop, but wrong in lingering ways like a song played a half step off. I found a lead through a small online forum where people tracked weird coincidences. Someone there recognized the pattern, faces that moved like Ava but weren't. They'd seen it in other cities. A woman who looked like a collage of 1,000 X's, the same smile pasted onto different faces. The user claimed it was a group that made a living out of something called re-scripting. They hired actors, used prosthetics and makeup, and created live scenes for men who wanted to remember their relationships exactly the way they wanted to. It was grotesque, but also plausible in a time when memory and personality had become commodities. I thought, someone is recreating Ava to teach me a lesson, or to torture me, or both. Then the day I'd been dreading arrived. I got a package with no return address, an old Polaroid camera, a roll of film, and a note in Ava's handwriting that said, "Take one picture. You know where." The handwriting was hers, the slight slant, the way she crossed her T's low, but I'd seen that same script on other messages I'd received after the breakup, and sometimes her handwriting had been mimicked so well I couldn't tell the difference. My hands shook as I drove to the place where we'd first met, a run-down bookstore wedged between a laundromat and a deli on a street that smelled like fried onions and rain. The same bench, the same lamppost where we'd carved our initials in childish defiance of time. I set the camera up like a character in a play and took one photo of the bench. The click of the shutter sounded loud in the empty street. I needed proof that something tangible still existed in a world where images arrived like ghosts through email. I slid the film into a kiosk and fed it through like a man performing a ritual, hands steady despite my pulse. A minute later, the thin white frame popped out. The image was black at first, then the face emerged like a bruise settling into skin. It was Ava sitting on the bench, knees tucked under her coat, staring down at her hands. She looked real. She looked achingly real. I breathed a laugh that turned into a sob until I heard it, my laugh, coming from the alley behind me. I turned slowly. A man stood there, his shadow long under the orange lamplight. He was my height. His hair was the same dull brown I had. He wore my jacket. For a second I thought my brother had followed me, that this was some elaborate joke. Then the man smiled in a way that made my stomach flip. It was my smile. Not a look-alike. My lips. My teeth. The man lifted one hand and held the camera I'd just used, the same vintage Polaroid shaking slightly. He said in my voice, "You look for faces like they're proof you're still alive." The alley narrowed around us. My knees refused to hold. I fled, but the image of that other me clung to my vision. I spent nights watching the footage from the plant camera in my living room, scouring it for the first sign of the man. There. A shadow moved past the window at midnight on a night when I'd been 2 blocks away at a friend's show. The figure paused, turned, and for the briefest fraction of a second, the door of the wardrobe opened behind him, and out stepped someone who looked like me, wearing a borrowed jacket and holding a camera to his chest like a priest carrying a holy relic. He set down a Polaroid on the table that morning and left. I rewound the footage until the small square photo on the coffee table came into frame. The image was a portrait of me asleep on the couch, and in the background, clear as day, Ava, smiling right at the lens, was sitting inches away, fingers tracing the air above my face. I booked every doctor I could afford. Parasomnia, one neurologist said, flipping through my chart with professional detachment. Sleepwalking episodes under stress can produce complex behaviors, she explained. Some people act out their dreams. It happens. Her words were medicine and poison. They explained how I could be in two places. No, not explain, but offer a mechanism that made my own guilt plausible. I wanted it to be an involuntary disorder I could blame. I wanted it to be anything but intention. But the footage, the Polaroids, the men who wore my face like a costume, these things nested inside me like seeds of doubt. If I had done any of this while sleepwalking, did that make it less violent? Less deliberate? I hated that question so much I stopped sleeping at all. The last clue I found was in the back of the closet behind a stack of winter coats, a small wooden box with my initials carved into the lid. I had opened it 100 times in other lives, buried mementos from childhood and movie stubs. This time, inside, was a short audio cassette labeled with a date 2 nights after Ava left. My hand trembled so badly, the cassette slipped and landed in my palm like an animal. I didn't own a cassette player anymore, but I drove to an old electronics repair shop that still kept junk machines for people who missed the past. The owner slid the tape in and turned the knobs until the hiss resolved into a voice that made my bones hollow out. It was me. My voice, recorded on a night I didn't remember. My voice calm at first, then heavy with something like resolve, saying, "If she can leave, I can make her stay. If she can make me disappear, I'll make sure she never leaves anyone alone again." The tape went on, fingers of me describing ways to recreate memories, props, actors, staged scenes, a pattern that would make someone believe they were haunting me back. The voice confessed to planting photos, to hiring people who could look like her, to creating illusions of presence. Then, after a long pause, the voice said softly, almost tenderly, "And if I can't make her come back, then I'll make sure I can't bear the silence of anyone who ever leaves me." My stomach dropped into a space I hadn't known existed. The shop owner watched me with thin curiosity. I left with the tape jarred in my coat pocket like contraband. I walked the long way home, past the bookstore, past the bench. The city felt like a stage that had been slowly packed up while I was asleep. Every face I passed felt like a prop. I had to know. I went back to the apartment and pulled up the camera footage, the Polaroids, the emails. I watched until my eyes blurred, piecing together a montage of nights where I had been home, then somewhere else on the tape, planting evidence to make myself the victim, to be loved, to be sought after. I watched myself arrange photos, write notes in Ava's style, send images to my own email, and then report them. The person in the footage moved like a stranger who knew me too well, one hand gentle with the objects, the other clutching a photograph of us like a relic. I don't know when the habit began. Maybe it started with a desperate call that went wrong, a night I'd wanted her back so badly I staged a scene to pull her out of her new life. Maybe it started even earlier, in the quiet compartments of my loneliness. What I did know was that the more I watched, the thinner the line between my waking self and whatever else I had become. The tape had been my confession, but it had been recorded by someone I couldn't fully recognize. Me, and not me. And then, on the screen, in the last frame of footage from the camera by the window, the man in my jacket turned and looked straight at the lens. He smiled, the same way I smile when I think someone's about to say something funny, and he mouthed one word. I clicked pause, zoomed in until pixels turned to grain, and read his lips like a condemned man trying to decode his sentence. The word was short, deliberate, and blazing with a cruelty I'd never seen in my reflection. Stay. My phone buzzed in the dark on my kitchen counter, an unknown number. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the remote and the tape skipped, a high, mechanical sob. I picked up the phone. The message preview read, "It's safer if you do." The sender name was blank. My reflection in the black glass of the turned-off TV looked like any night I had feared. Tired, hunted, small. I stood up to move to the door, to run, to throw the world into motion and leave behind the tapes and the Polaroids and the proofs that I'd become the architect of my own torment. That's when I heard the soft scrape of a shoe on wood behind me. The exact sound the camera had captured a dozen times. The sound of the man in my jacket pacing in the dark. My heart slammed. I spun around because at some point you learn the only way to survive is to confront the thing you don't want to be. The kitchen was empty. The apartment hummed with the banality of a life someone else might envy. The plants, the bookshelf, a mug with a chip in the rim. But in the shadow cast by the hallway, a shape resolved, tall, familiar in posture. I felt a piece inside me go brittle. I could hear my voice in my head, the one that had recorded those words into the cassette. If she can leave, I can make her stay. I took a step toward the shadow and then another. Because there are moments when human beings choose what to be. The shadow moved forward too, and as it stepped into the light, the room folded in on itself and everything made a kind of terrible sense. There he was, standing in my doorway with my face,